If you're anything like me, you've probably downloaded your fair share of sock knitting patterns, some more inspiring than others. So in today's video, I am sharing 15 truly lovely designs with you. They are all very charming, cute, and best of all, free. So whether you're in the mood for some whimsical woodland designs or some elegant lace, I am certain that there is going to be something that speaks to you. Let's get started. I will include links to every pattern that I talk about in the description box below, together with a link for a bundle that I put together on Ravelry that contains more than 40 free sock knitting patterns. And the first pattern that I would like to show you is called the Nutmeg Socks by Tanya Bali. This design was published in February of 2022 and is knitted with a fingering weight yarn with a gauge of 34 stitches and 46 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 0, which corresponds to 2 millimeters, and it comes in 3 different sizes. This pattern is knitted from the cuff down. It features a simple but engaging texture stitch pattern on the leg and the foot, and a slip stitch heel flap and gusset. And I also really like this cable detail in the ribbing. The next pattern that I would like to show you is called I'm So Basic Socks by Summer Lee, and this one came out in August of 2022. It is knitted with a light fingering weight yarn with a gauge of 40 stitches and 28 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 1, which corresponds to a 2.25 millimeter needle, and it comes in 4 different sizes. This sock knitting pattern is perfect for beginners. It's an all-over stockinette pattern, so there are no complicated stitches involved. And in addition, the pattern is very detailed and walks you through everything step by step. And there are even links to video tutorials included in the pattern. I am working on a pair of I'm So Basic socks myself right now, and this is how far I have gotten on the first sock. So the yarn that I am using is Mondim by Retrosaria Rosa Pomar, and I purchased this as the undyed colorway. I think it's called 100, and then naturally dyed it myself using logwood, cochineal and oak galls. The technique that I used here is something that I call my inverse speckling technique, and I absolutely love the way the sock is turning out, as you can see here. So this inverse speckling technique is a technique that I developed myself, and it is part of an online course that I am currently putting the finishing touches on. If this is something that interests you, I can highly recommend that you give dyeing yarn with natural dyes a try. It is so much fun and very enjoyable. I'm going to put the link to the waitlist for my online course in the description box below as well, so you can sign up and then will be the first to know once the course becomes available, and you'll also be eligible for the introductory price. Back to the pattern. I do have to say I enjoy this pattern quite a lot. It is very simple to do and just a joy to knit. The next pattern that I have picked out to show you is called the Daisy Socks by Debbie Ford, and this one came out in July of 2020. It is knitted with a fingering weight yarn with a gauge of 34 stitches and 48 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 1, which corresponds to a 2.25 millimeter needle, and it comes in 3 different sizes. There is a lace pattern on the front of the foot that comes both written and charted in the pattern. And I also wanted to read the designer's description and inspiration on the Ravelry project page to you. She says, "Inspired by my favorite flowers, this pattern is a relaxing and intuitive knit. These socks are worked top down. The pattern includes instructions for a heel flap and gusset, a modified wedge toe, and how to work these in a contrast yarn, which is of course optional." And the next pattern that I would like to show you is called Business Casual by Tanis Lavallee. This pattern came out in December of 2011 and is knitted with a fingering weight yarn and a gauge of 28 stitches and 40 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 1.5, which corresponds to 2.5 millimeters, and the design comes in 2 different sizes. The designer states that this pair of socks was designed for her dad, and that with this preppy faux argyle design you could take the socks from the office all the way to the weekend. The next pair of socks that I would like to show you is called Fairy Maiden by Olivia from This Handmade Live. This pattern came out in March of 2020 and is knitted with a fingering weight yarn with a gauge of 36 stitches over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 1.5, which corresponds to 2.5 millimeters, and it comes in one size. The design is knitted from the cuff down and has a lacy and simple cable texture. The designer states that the pattern is easy to memorize, but it only comes charted. It contains a traditional heel flap and gusset and a wedge toe. Now the pattern is written for only one size, but the designer states that you can easily adjust the width of the sock by simply going up or down needle sizes. And what you could also do is increase or decrease the number of purl stitches in between the lace motifs. Now, Olivia has more than 70 different sock knitting patterns in her portfolio, and you should definitely check her out if you haven't done so already. But I wanted to show you just one more of her beautiful designs just because it's way too pretty not to. And the second pattern that I have picked out is called Wood Nymph. And this one was released in December of 2017. It is knitted with a fingering weight yarn as well, with a gauge of 36 stitches and 48 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 1.5, which corresponds to 2.5 millimeters, and it also comes in one size. She states that she was inspired by the wood nymphs, which are magical beings that live in the forests and woodlands. This sock pattern incorporates a lovely lace stitch inspired by such creatures. This leaf lace stitch is knit on either side of the socks, and it comes in the form of a chart. The next sock pattern that I would like to show you is called Thorsminde, and it is a design by Rachel Sugord. I hope that's how you pronounce her name. This one was published by Filcolana, so the yarn company, and it is knitted in their sock yarn base called Filcolana Arwetta, and it came out in August of 2021. The yarn is a light fingering weight yarn with a gauge of 32 stitches and 44 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 1.5, which corresponds to a 2.5 millimeter needle, and it comes in 4 different sizes. The socks are decorated with a small faux cable and a slip stitch on the sides, and they also have an easy knit and purl pattern that's running down the front of the foot. And the designer states that this design was inspired by these traditional Guernsey sweaters that fishermen used to wear. Next up is a pattern called Laid Edges by Kelly McPherson, and it came out in March of 2020. It is knitted with a DK weight yarn with a gauge of 28 stitches and 38 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 2.5, which corresponds to 3 millimeters. It comes in 3 different sizes. And there is this beautiful simple cable motif that is running down the sides of the otherwise simple stockinette sock. And the designer states on the Ravelry page that she even has a video tutorial that shows you how to do this cable stitch, and that's on her Instagram page, which I'm going to link for you in the description box. Next up is a pattern called Kevään korvalla by Daria Virankari. I hope that's correct. And the name of the pattern, it's a Finnish name, and translated into English it means in the ear of spring. This design is knitted with a fingering weight yarn with a gauge of 29 stitches over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 1, which corresponds to a 2.25 millimeter needle, and it comes in 3 different sizes. These socks are knitted from the cuff down and contain a French heel, and the stitch pattern looks like a simple combination of knits and purls that create this very interesting stitch texture. Next up is a bit of a holiday inspired sock, but it is never too early to start knitting for Christmas, isn't it? So this one is called Holly Christmas Socks by Knit and Wave, and it came out in November of 2024. It is knitted with a fingering weight yarn with a gauge of 32 stitches and 42 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle sizes used are a US 1 and a US 1.5 that corresponds to 2.25 and 2.5 millimeters, and it comes in 4 different sizes. Now the designer states that this is more of a recipe than a concrete pattern, and that you could simply use your favorite stockinette sock knitting pattern and then just add her colorwork motif on top of it. And she was inspired by a Christmas sweater that she was knitting, and since she wanted to create a matching pair of socks and couldn't find anything, she decided to create her own pattern for it. And I'm not sure if this is the pattern that she was knitting on, but to me this colorwork motif looks a lot like the sweater from Pernille Larsen from Knitting for Olive, which is called the Holly sweater. So this might have been her inspiration for this pair of socks, I'm not sure. Next up is a design called Fioriti Socks by Lisa Schmidt, and it came out in January of 2025. It is knitted with a light fingering weight yarn with a gauge of 30 stitches and 40 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used are a US 1.5, which corresponds to 2.5 millimeters, and it comes in 3 different sizes. This has a beautiful all-over lace motif, and the socks are knitted from the cuff down and feature a German short row heel. The pattern comes charted, but the designer states that there are also some written instructions within the pattern. Next up is a design called the Speckled Space Socks by Amanda Stevens, and it came out in July of 2016. It is knitted with a fingering weight yarn with a gauge of 32 stitches and 44 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size is a US 1.5, which corresponds to 2.5 millimeters, and it comes in 3 different sizes. The designer states that she was inspired by the speckled and variegated yarns of her favorite hand dyers, but she was often wondering what to do with these beautiful skeins of yarns, and that's why she created her own design. And the Speckled Space Socks feature an easy textured pattern with some chevron shaping to add interest and minimal purling for speed. This is a toe-up sock pattern with gusset and creases and a heel flap, but of course you could substitute for any heel of your liking, and you could also easily transfer the pattern to be a top-down knitting format if that's what you prefer. Next up is a very cute design called the Biscuit Socks by Fluffy Fibers, who is Isabelle. And this design came out in November of 2020. It is knitted with a DK weight yarn with a gauge of 24 stitches over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needles used are a US 2.5 and a US 4, which corresponds to 3 and 3.5 millimeters, and it comes in 2 different sizes. The socks are knitted from the cuff down, contain a Dutch heel and a star toe. And the pattern comes with 2 separate sets of instructions, one for double pointed needles and one for circular needles. This design reminds me a lot of one of my favorite sock knitting patterns, which is called the Hermione's Everyday Socks by Erika Lüder. This is also a free pattern, but it is written for fingering weight yarn. So I think it's perfect that Isabelle created a pattern for a DK weight yarn, but the knit pearl texture in both patterns looks very similar to me. The next pattern that I have picked out to show you is called the Wind in the Oak Tree by Anna McKilla, and it came out in January of 2024. It is knitted with a fingering weight yarn with a gauge of 32 stitches and 44 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 1, which corresponds to 2.25 millimeters, and it comes in 1 size. These socks are knitted from the top down and they contain stranded colorwork on the cuff and on the foot just before the toe. And there's also cabling on both the cuff and the rest of the sock. The next pattern that I would like to show you is called the Mountain Ash Socks by Shui Wu. I hope that's how you say her name. She is from Canada, but I think this is a Chinese name. And she's also known as Cow from Mars. The pattern came out in December of 2023 and is knitted with a fingering weight yarn with a gauge of 24 stitches and 44 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 1.5, which corresponds to 2.5 millimeters, and it comes in 2 different sizes. This is a beautiful cable and lace pattern that is knitted from the cuff down and contains a heel flap and gusset construction. But most of the pattern is charted only. And there you have it, 15 stunning sock knitting patterns that are available completely for free. Now, if you're looking for even more knitting pattern roundups of free knitting patterns or some sock knitting tips, I am going to link a couple of videos for you on the screen. See you next time.